Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to the second installment in my video series about the music of Peter Hammill. So for this video, I'm actually going to be tackling 3 albums at once. I'm gonna be doing his whole collection like this and kind of break it into chunks. Makes it a little bit easier than doing a video for each and every album, because that would be a lot of videos. The man has been quite prolific. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about 3 very highly regarded albums. We've got Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night, The Silent Corner and the Empty Stage, and of course, In Camera. And this is a very, very interesting period. This is I've heard it referred to before as the Lost Van der Graaf Generator period. Because of course, Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night, this guy right here, was the first album released after the breakup of Van der Graaf Generator in 1972. It's the first release since Pawn Hearts, which would have been 71, so 2-year gap for the fans to wait before any new music had been released. And it's a very, very interesting album. I'll be totally honest, and it could be quite controversial in saying this, but this whole period from 72 to 75 is not one of my favorite periods in Hammill's catalog, which, again, like I said, they're very highly regarded albums amongst the fans. Some people kind of regard this as, you know, maybe even the high water mark, but for me, this is very much a research and development period. Where we see Hammill not only developing as a songwriter, but we see him developing as a producer and as an engineer as well. This album is particularly important in the catalog because it's the very first album that was recorded at Sofa Sound, which was his home studio. So he took all the basic tracks and recorded it in his home. And I believe, yeah, the remaining bits were done at Trident Studios, I do believe. Don't quote me on that. A lot of the albums, oh wait a minute, right here, yeah, and it was mixed at Trident Studios, so recorded it at the home studio, mixed at Trident Studios, which is, again, very forward thinking. You think this is released in 1973 to, you know, collect enough gear to be able to do that and create, you know, a major album that's going to be released. I mean, that's quite impressive, very entrepreneurial, and you know, I imagine there was obviously a lot riding on him because you know, with the band breaking up and obviously still trying to earn a living by creating this music, you know, it was quite an important thing. So for this album itself, it's, I'll be honest, I think the big thing with it is the production value. Obviously this is the first time he'd ever recorded anything from home, so it's not going to sound perfect, but it does sound quite rough in places. Low production value, almost sounds like demos at times. However, I will say that adds to the charm of a lot of these pieces. And furthermore, there's live versions of a lot of these songs that you can hear as well that have, you know, a better production value, but that's one of the most notable things that I've noticed on here. But some of the songs on here are very interesting because, you know, because the production value is so basic, we almost get, you know, kind of a sample of what Hammill's solo performances were like back in the day. There's a couple of pieces on here that are just, you know, guitar and vocal or piano and vocal, so very, very raw. As Hammill would go on, you know, the albums and songs would be much more produced and much more elaborate with many more instruments and what have you. So this is kind of an interesting album for that. So this one opens with German Overalls, which is a great track, quite personal actually. And it kind of chronicles the German leg of Van der Graaf's tour, the Cosmos tour, as it was written. And there's some great lyrics on there, you know, name-checking the members of Van der Graaf, of course. And it's a very interesting track. It's, you know, essentially it is a guitar and vocal track, but there's lots of work with the harmonium. He was really into using that instrument around this time. And it's a very interesting track. The liner notes to the CD, Hammill implies that this could well have been intended for the band, and I can kind of see that. I mean, it's fairly repetitive, but it is also quite lengthy, and there's lots of great dynamics to the piece as well, and I imagine with the rest of the band there to kind of finalize the arrangement, this could have been, you know, a pretty interesting and aggressive track. Another very interesting thing to go along with the Lost Van der Graaf period, really, is all the songs that could have been on the follow-up to Pawn Hearts. Obviously, the closing track of this album, In the Black Room, I'm almost certain would have been on there, clearly a Van der Graaf song. We also have Rendezvous, which is a great track, The Liquidator, which is interesting, and A Louse and Not at Home, which I'll talk about in a bit. Getting off topic though, moving on to the second track of the album, we got Slender Threads. And this is one of the ones that I think is really interesting because it's a great kind of snapshot of Hammill's solo live performances at the time. Very, very bare bones skeleton of the song, just an acoustic guitar and the vocals. And very slow paced, very, you know, pastoral again. It's a quite a nice little track. I've been a fan of Slender Threads. He's been playing it live a fair bit recently as well, which is cool. We get to track 3, Rock and Roll. This is a very interesting track. This is kind of the first time Hammill really wrote a straight-ahead rock song, I suppose. You could argue Van der Graaf Generator is, you know, in principle rock and roll. It is progressive rock, or, you know, whether it is progressive rock or whatever the heck Van der Graaf Generator music is, it has got that loud, thumping aggression that is associated with rock music. But rock and roll is much more stripped down. We get a riff, we get you know, I wouldn't say straightforward lyrics, but I mean it's a hard-hitting, straight-ahead rock song. We got all the I do believe we got all the members of Van der Graaf Generator on here. Nick Potter's playing bass. We get David Jackson on the saxophone. Of course, we get Guy Evans on the drums. But great song. Again, kind of low production values, but the song transcends that. I love the big hook. That roll me over. Really, really good stuff. I can't impersonate Hammill's voice. There's no way. No one can. But yeah, rock and roll, interesting track. I'm a big fan. And this is kind of the start of a thread that would carry on throughout his career, you know, up to the K Group and beyond, which we'll talk about eventually. Side 1 closes with In the End, another raw skeleton of a song. We just get Hammill at the piano and his voice. And I believe this might be one of the first, you know, proper Hammill piano pieces, really, because it is actually him playing the piano. Of course, songs like Vision on Fool's Mate, that is Hugh Banton on the piano. So this is Hammill on piano and voice, of course, and it's a tremendous piece in the end. Very long and expansive, about 7 minutes long. I really like the bridge section, that kind of uncertain, wavering da 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 da. Very, very cool stuff, and it's almost kind of funny to hear Hammill sing about, you know, having the fears of not being able to keep going on with, you know, what if my mouth falls slack and I can't summon up another tune? And he's saying this back in '73. Here we are in 2019, and there's still new music coming out. So that's kind of quite interesting. But in the end, it's a classic Peter Hammill piece, and very much a solo thing for sure. We flip the album over to side 2. Check out that really cool kind of anti-color of Mr. Hammill. This is also, incidentally, the gatefold, as you would have seen when I was looking for the studio there. Quite cool. Anyway, side 2 opens with What It's Worth, another really great little acoustic song, kind of, you know, in similar vein to Slender Threads, a little bit more upbeat though, and we also get David Jackson playing some flutes on there as well. But What It's Worth is always one of my favorites on the album. I think it's a great little song. I love the bridge, love the whole track. I love the there's a very sort of relaxed atmosphere to it, and a pondering atmosphere, and I think lyrically it kind of deals with, again, uncertainties about, you know, diving into the music industry and, you know, trying to make it happen one way or another. Not necessarily trying to make it, but, you know, make it all work, which is interesting. Moving on to the next track, Easy to Slip Away. Now this is, I think a lot of people would regard this as one of the highlights of the album, and I mean, I agree. I mean, it is a fantastic piece, and if you know, if I were to see Peter Hammill in a live solo performance and he played the song, it would be absolutely amazing. But I'll be honest, it's never been one of my favorites on the album, and some would call that sacrilegious because it is a very highly regarded Hammill solo track, but not necessarily one of my favorites. I don't know why. Very personal lyrics. It actually almost continues the story that was carried on, that was started with Refugees on The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other, the Van der Graaf album. So that's kind of interesting, talking about losing touch with old friends, and I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's a universal topic, but I think the direct references to Mike and Susie, his former flatmates back in the day, I mean, sometimes I feel it could be a little too personal. I don't know. That might also contribute to the universality of it, because we all have, you know, people that unfortunately we weren't able to keep in touch with. But there you go. Also, obviously, nowadays piano ballad, and we get that classic Hammill attack at the piano. So yeah, Easy to Slip Away. Profoundly good song, but not one of my We move on to the next song, Dropping the Torch. Now, there's very, very few Peter Hammill songs that I dislike, and I don't dislike this song. When the album's on, I quite enjoy it. Dropping the Torch is great, but it always totally passes me by, and I can never, even right after listening to the album, it doesn't stick with me in my head for whatever reason. Very, very quiet, kind of follows in the tradition of your Slender Threads or your What's It Worth, but quite a bit more low-key than both of those. I'm not sure what it is, but it's a nice song. It just tends to pass me by. But the quietness of it serves as a really nice counterpoint. That leads us into the final track, which is In the Black Room. Now, this is a profoundly fantastic, fantastic song. Even though it was released on the Peter Hammill solo album, it is clearly a Van der Graaf Generator piece. With it being on Hamill's solo album, though, I'm sure he would have had a little more of a say in terms of the arrangement and how it was going to be presented. But this was a song that was performed in, I believe, in the early first period of Van der Graaf. It would have been 71, 72, I think it would have been performed, and I think they played it in the 70s as well, 75, 76, and when I saw them in 2009 they played it, so it is a classic piece. It's very, very dark, very operatic, and it's just an incredible moment. The middle section of it too, the whole tower sequence, it used to scare the crap out of me as a kid, as a teenager. Just the thunder, silence, that whole sequence is just utterly fantastic. And the very end has got the big sort of the turnaround. It ends on sort of a hopeful note, but it's still got that darkness. That last line, "But I'm living while I choose," there's a profoundness to it. A really, really good song. You must hear In the Black Room. If you're a fan of Van der Graaf Generator and you've never come across this, and you've never heard In the Black Room, what are you waiting for? It is an essential Van der Graaf Generator song, as well as being, happened to be released on Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night. So there it is, very interesting track. Which means we can move on, or not an interesting track, a very interesting album. Which means we can move on to the third solo album in his collection. We have The Silent Corner and The Empty Stage. Again, I have the gatefold of that so we can see the very unusual album cover. If anyone can tell me exactly what this is supposed to mean, I'd be delighted to know. We get his official symbol there, the combination of all the letters in his name, plus the Scorpio sign. We get Hammill himself here, but really not sure what I'm looking at. It's very striking, and it's a great album cover, but I've always been mildly confused by it. And again, another album very, very highly regarded by fans, and I definitely think this is a step up from Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night. He's still developing and learning as a producer and as an engineer, obviously. This is another one recorded primarily in his home studio, Sofa Sound. Some of it was recorded at Trident Studios, I believe. But what makes this album interesting, and there's always been that sort of blur between, is it a Van der Graaf Generator album or is it a Peter Hammill solo album? And I think of all the albums in the entire collection, this one, the line is at its blurriest. This is, there are a few, definitively solo songs on here, but there's some pieces on here that, obviously, A Louse Is Not a Home, the closing track, was a Van der Graaf song, but there's other pieces on here that, that could well easily be a Van der Graaf piece that wasn't written back in the early period or the second period, so it's, the line is very blurry between whether this is truly a Hammill solo album or if the Van der Graaf is Van der Graafing again, if it's generating again. But there's some great leaps forward, specifically as a solo artist on here as well, which is great. So the album opens with Modern, and this is 100% a classic Peter Hammill solo piece. It's been performed live pretty regularly all the way through his career, and it's a great track. It's a long, expansive piece, but it's an epic. But it's definitely not a band track. It doesn't have the Van der Graaf Generator feel. It's essentially acoustic guitar and voice, but there's all kinds of crazy effects and whatnot. And by the time we get to that long middle section, rhythmically and sonically, it all kind of breaks apart. So it's really, really interesting thing, and again, the kind of thing that a band wouldn't really be able to do, which makes it more definitively a solo piece. Great song. The lyrics are great, talking about cities and, you know, I suppose being isolated in the city, or the irony of being the epicenter of a population, but you're still more isolated than you've ever been. It's a very interesting kind of concept, and I love the references to ancient cities, Jericho, Babylon, Atlantis. It's very, very cool, and it's a great track. One of the classic Peter Hammill solo tracks. One of my favorites on the album for sure. Track 2 is Wilhelmina, which is a song about babies. I believe it's about Guy Evans' baby daughter who would have been born around this time. And this one doesn't quite do it for me, like some of the other tracks on the album. Again, there's very few Peter Hammill songs that I dislike, and this is still not one of them. I still enjoy it in context of the album, but it's not one that I'd throw on, you know, all the time. And it just, as I said, a nice song, kind of pondering having kids and early childhood, and, you know, kind of imagining the line that they're going to weave through time eventually, which is all good and interesting. Track 3 on this album, however, is an absolute and utter out-and-out Peter Hammill classic. This is The Lie, inspired by Bernini's St. Teresa, which I saw. I did a Europe trip a few years ago, and we went to Italy, and I knew that's where the sculpture was, so I had to take a look at that because, hey, I learned about it through Peter Hammill, and I've been interested in it ever since. But it talks about religion and sanctity and sexuality and all this kind of stuff, and it's a visceral piece, just piano and voice. I think there might be some other embellishments in there, I'm not too sure, but it's a striking song right from the very opening low rumblings at the bottom of the keys there. It grabs your attention, and one of his most vicious vocal performances as well. There's some great vocals on here as well, and it's a classic piece. The Lie is a definitive Hammill solo piece, I would say. Again, it's been performed for many years. Then we wrap the first side up with Forsaken Gardens. Now this is the kind of possibly lost Van de Graaff Generator track that makes this album kind of a little blurry. I don't believe this was written in the first period of Van de Graaff, and obviously it wasn't written in the second period because it was on this album. But it's clearly a band track. We have all the members of Van de Graaff on it. We've got, I'm pretty sure, Nick Evans, or not Nick Evans, Nick Potter may be on this track as well. I'm not 100% sure. Might be in the sleeve here. Where is it? He's got these handwritten liner notes, which are quite fun, but difficult to read at times. No, there is no Nick Potter on this album, so my mistake. But yeah, Forsaken Gardens is very much, it feels like it could be a lost Van de Graaff Generator piece. I mean, it's obviously arranged to be on this Hammill solo album, but having all the members contribute, and you can tell they contributed, it does make it interesting. As for the song itself, again, not one of my all-time favorites. It's very interesting, again, for a historical context. But it's for whatever reason it doesn't quite grab me like some of the other songs in its collection. And again, that might be considered blasphemy. A lot of Hammill fans really regard this track very highly, and rightly so. But for whatever reason, it's always been just a good song for me, not stellar. We flip the album over though, and we get Red Shift opens the second side, and this one I really like, and it clearly has a band vibe to it. We get some guitar from Randy California, who, the band he was in escapes me now. I'm not going to try and remember. Can't waste time. But Red Shift is a fantastic track, and this is another one where, I mean, is it solo or is it Van de Graaff? I'm not really too sure. Like I said, it's clearly a band track. We have Guy Evans on there. David Jackson is throwing some really cool saxophone in there, but it doesn't really have a Van de Graaff feel to it. I love the lyrics, very cosmic lyrics. What's the line? Towards the end of the bridge, and I am a song in the depths of the galaxies. That whole sequence is just absolutely stellar. And we get that fantastic pulsating lead guitar from Mr. Randy California. And yeah, just a great track. I'm a big fan of Red Shift, more so than Forsaken Gardens, which again might be controversial, but what can I say? I'm a fan. It's what I like. We move on to the next track. Track 6 of the album is Rubicon. Now this one's almost typical of some of the songs on Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night. I always get a vibe between Chameleon and Silent Corner. Chameleon's more acoustic guitar focused, and this one's a little more piano focused and band arranged focused as well. But Rubicon is a nice, simple, little kind of classic Peter Hammill acoustic guitar song, and it's great. It's very reflective and sweet, and I wouldn't call it somber. There's a sweetness to it, but I've always been a big fan of Rubicon. Great little song, and one that I guess was performed not too long ago. It's not one that I think has been regularly performed, but it's one that appears now and again in Hammill's sets, which is interesting. And the album, of course, closes with the Van der Graaf song, arranged in a Peter Hammill way, "A Louse Is Not a Home." Now, this is another absolutely outstanding track. It could have been one that would have been on the missing Van der Graaf Generator album. I'm sure this would have been on the follow-up to Pot Heart. So that would have been In the Black Room, Louse Is Not a Home, and I would think probably Rendezvous as well, which was released on Time Vaults many years later as a demo. Different story. But A Louse Is Not a Home is fantastic. It's dark, it's operatic. I suppose you could call it a cousin to In the Black Room in terms of what it's about. I suppose it's about mental illness of some kind or another, whether it's schizophrenia or I don't want to get into the specifics of analyzing the lyrics, but it is creepy, and the whole build-up section in the middle is intense, and it gets very, very intense vocals, and the whole band is playing at an absolutely stellar level. So yeah, A Louse Is Not a Home is a classic piece. Another one that was performed at a solo concert. Interestingly, I always thought it would be cool to hear the current trio version of Van der Graaf try and pull off A Louse Is Not a Home. I think that would be really, really cool. But they've done Playing a Lighthouse Keepers, Flight from Hamill's solo career. They've put together a lot of really great stuff. So I'm not complaining by any means. But yeah, that concludes this album. Again, there's kind of a logical progression when it comes to these, where you get the very early solo recordings, home recordings on Chameleon. You can see a gradual improvement when we get up to Silent Corner, and that leads us, of course, to In Camera. Now, like I said, I don't necessarily regard this period as an all-time favorite period in Hammill's solo career for myself. Very much a research and development period, but In Camera is a very special album. I think it is definitely the best of these three, Chameleon, Silent Corner, and In Camera. This is definitely the best one. This, to me, could be his first truly, the first true Peter Hammill solo album. And that kind of sounds weird when I say it out loud, because obviously this is the fourth overall, but a lot of the essential components of Hammill's art as a solo artist are present on here, which aren't necessarily on the first few. So I mean, Fool's Made is clearly a band album of lighter songs that weren't appropriate for Van der Graaf anymore. Chameleon could be testing the waters. Silent Corner is developing a little bit, and then he pretty much arrives here. So In Camera's got everything. You've got the sweet, tender ballad. You've got the kind of epic form. You have the rock song, and you also have the sonic experimentation, which would become quite big in the late 70s with his other albums. But the big piece on here, Gog/Magog, kind of represents the first true sonic experimentation, which is fantastic. And as a solo artist as well, this one does not lean on Van der Graaf Generator at all, almost. Yeah, I want to say almost. I'm going to say almost there. You could argue that Chameleon and Silent Corner both nod to Van der Graaf a fair bit, but this one is truly a solo work, and very highly regarded, and rightly so. Definitely my favorite of this early 70s period. So it opens with Ferret and Featherbird. And this is a really, really nice song. I think this is actually this was one of the really, really early Van der Graaf Generator songs. This Ferret and Featherbird could well have been on Aerosol Grey Machine or Fool's Made as well. And it's really nice. I love how it enters the stereo space. It fades in, and there's kind of all these discordant sounds and whatnot. I love the slide guitar that comes in, but it all slowly pieces together, and it's a really, really sweet, simple little ballad. A lovely love song, a lost love song, but it's one of acceptance as well. So there's a lot of positivity I get from that one. That brings us to No More, the Submariner. Huge contrast right off the bat when we get the sweetness of Ferret and Featherbird. Now we get this very aggressive, in-your-face, piercing synthesizer sounds that come out of the speakers out of nowhere. That quite jarring, but it's a great piece. This kind of represents one of the early Peter Hammill epics that it feels more solo than it does Van der Graaf. And also very, very important to note about this album is there's very little contribution from other musicians on this. This is pretty much all Hammill doing it himself. We do have Guy Evans. I think there's some other contributors as well, but I won't worry about getting that into my brain right now. But No More, the Submariner is a really, really good track. Song about growing up and sort of losing the innocence of childhood, and perhaps there's some themes of disillusion in there as well. But really, really good song. It brings us on to Tapeworm. This is the crazy rock song of the album. Could be a follow-up to Rock and Roll from Chameleon in the Shadow of the Night, but it's a little more crazy. The arrangement is a bit more all over the place, which I like. You get that kind of main theme, dun 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 dun, which is great. And then it's the middle section that's really, really interesting. I love that that little vocal fugue. I am a man, na 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 na, which is again total contrast in the context of the song, which is it's crazy, and I like it. Yeah, great song. The drumming is a bit quirky on it, and that is by no means Guy Evans' fault. This is one of the tracks that do have Guy Evans on it, but it's Hammill's timing. He's always been a quirky musician when it comes to playing guitar or playing piano, and quirky means that timekeeping isn't necessarily his strong suit. So Guy Evans had a hell of a job to try and keep everything together, because he simply overdubbed the drums on top of it. The track had been recorded already as Sofa Sound, and then I believe it was in Trident Studios that they got the drum take. So good on Guy Evans for managing to pull through that and keep the song all together. It's very cool. That brings us on to, again, the fourth track on the first side. One of the Peter Hammill classics that's on here. It's been performed many, many times, and usually he plays this one a cappella. He doesn't bring the acoustic guitar. The original version is just an acoustic guitar, and almost got there's a minstrel sort of a vibe, like a medieval vibe to it. But the live versions are great, where it's just a cappella. Really, really like that. And it's a classic, lost love ballad that Hammill does so well. I like the end as well. The main refrain is "This will never come again." At the very end, he says it once again, "This will never come again," and we get those two, those big synthesizer things come out. So we get two. It did come again, which is, I think that's kind of an in-joke, which is quite humorous, I find. The first side closes with Faint Heart in the Sermon. This is the other sort of solo epic song. It's kind of related to No More the Submariner, but I really like Faint Heart in the Sermon. This one, to me, is quite definitive. It's very much a solo thing, I think, although Van der Graaf did play this song a few times in '75, I believe. Don't quote me on that. But I'm a huge fan of Faint Heart in the Sermon. Very, lots of synthesizer overdubs. This would have been done in Trident Studios, I believe. And again, kind of makes it a cousin of No More the Submariner. I think I like Faint Heart more than Submariner, but yeah, it's really good. The song about questioning faith, and just having those kinds of questions and whatnot. And again, uncertainty is a very common theme when it comes to Hammill's career. But great song. I love the middle section as well. I get just a European vibe. It's a very simple little line he does on the piano. Dun 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 dun. And again, with all the synthesizer sounds that are kind of swirling around that, it's a very, very majestic sort of a thing. Really good. Might not have the best production value in the world, but it is really, really cool. It's a great, great song. I love Faint Heart in the Sermon. We flip the record over. We get almost the same picture of Mr. Hammill, but he's flapping the cloak around like a crazy fellow. That's fine. we flip the side. We flip the album over. We get the comet, the course, the tale opens the second side, and another one of the all-time Hammill classics. Been performed regularly ever since this album was released, and one of the first Hammill solo songs that I heard. Actually, I did collect the albums in pretty well in order, but there's certain songs that I came in contact with, and comet, the course, the tale was definitely one of them. And again, this is, I mean, it's got those epic qualities, but not a piano song. This is an acoustic song, and I think it was originally conceived as a sort of either a quartet or quintet of guitars. So there's a 12-string, there's a bass, and I think there's a couple other guitars on there as well. But it's very, very well arranged, and again, for someone who doesn't really consider himself to be a musician, I mean, I believe, you know, Hammill considers himself a songwriter first and foremost, and, you know, the musicianing bit is something you just kind of have to get over to be able to express the songs. But considering that is kind of where he comes from, it's quite an impressive arrangement musically, which is great. And the lyrics, of course, concern fate and time and all things that are kind of classic Peter Hammill topics. And I think that's why it's such a highly regarded piece in his collection. There's not much you can say about it. It's a beautiful piece, very dark, but it's a fantastic song. And it essentially acts as a little introduction to what I would say the centerpiece of the album is, which is the suite that is Gog and Magog. Now, Gog is a very, very dark song, very aggressive song, lots of harmonium on this version. And it's a, I think in Hamill's words, it's about a God that just doesn't care, but it's again, I have no words for it. You just have to go hear Gog. It is absolutely terrifying at times, and the right version of it, it can just get you. This has Guy Evans on drums again doing a wild job trying to keep everything together as an overdub. And yeah, I really don't know what to say about Gog. It's something you just have to hear. You must check it out because it is unique. I think I prefer some of the live versions that were done by Vandergraaf later on. They performed it in the 70s lineup and in the current lineup as the trio did Gog as well. And I think I prefer some of those versions because it's a bit tighter when in terms of performance. But even though Vandergraaf played this song, I still maintain that Gog Magog it feels more Hammill solo. I mean, it feels more like when Vandergraaf performs this, they're taking a Hammill song and they're implementing it themselves, whereas some of the stuff on Chameleon or Silent Corner and the Empty Stage, it's quite the opposite. He's kind of taking from Vandergraaf and applying it. And then that topic becomes quite interesting when we get into the current Vandergraaf reunion. But again, we'll get to that eventually. Anyway, Gog serves as sort of the intro to Magog, which is a fantastic sort of sprawling, I think it's like 17 minutes. It's quite long, but it's a wild experiment in tape loops, and I believe that harmonium thing is being implemented as well, but it's a bizarre soundscape, and it's presented in a very raw form on this album, which I like. It's an appeal, definitely a big appeal, but you can see as we go further along into Hammill's catalog that it's kind of an essential part with kind of working with sound as if it's clay, in Hammill's words. And even though it's presented here as just a sonic experiment, later on he would do things like Magog, but it would be specifically to create a song in itself, which is a very interesting way of working. But it can be traced back to these tracks. And so there you go. This in one video we have covered the lost Vandergraaf generator period in the early 70s when Vandergraaf was not active, but Hammill was still doing lots of very good and vital work. So like I said, maybe a little bit controversial. Like I said, I'm not a huge, well, I am a huge fan of this period, but it's not one of my favorite periods in his solo collection, but obviously some essential tracks. So on that note, with my voice very sore from constant rambling, I will bid you adieu. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff, and you will see me in the future with more videos on Peter Hammill. Thank you very much.